Okay, let's unpack this. Welcome to today's deep dive, where we are looking at a really fascinating cultural analysis for you today.
Yeah, we are trying to figure out why the 1980s is basically cited as the definitive modern generation.
Right, it is this rare historical bridge between the old analog physical community and new digital personal agency. I like to think of it as, well, society's teenage growth spurt.
Oh, I love that analogy. Like,
Mhm.
how so?
Well, think about being a teenager. You finally get the keys to the car, which gives you this, massive, thrilling independence, but you still have a curfew.
Yeah, you still have to physically come home to your family.
Exactly. The 80s gave us the thrilling keys of digital agency, but we were still anchored by the curfew of a physical community.
That tension is exactly the central theme of the sources we are digging into. But to understand how we got there, the research emphasizes we have to look at the hangover of the 1970s.
Right, the sources talk a lot about stagflation.
Yeah, stagflation. For anyone listening who hasn't dug into 70s economics, it is basically this brutal combo. You have high inflation making everyday goods expensive while economic growth just, stalls out.
And unemployment stays unusually high, which creates a lot of systemic pessimism. I mean, people just feel trapped.
They do. So the 1980s countered this by introducing what the analysis calls an architecture of optimism. And the primary mechanism was a pretty controversial pivot to supply-side economics.
Right, the policy shift that dropped the top marginal income tax rate from 70% down to 28%.
Exactly. And just looking impartially at the theoretical logic here, the idea was that if entrepreneurs keep way more of their potential profits, they will be more willing to take massive financial risks to build new industries.
And the geopolitical landscape really mirrored that domestic shift, too. The Cold War tension that defined the previous decades suddenly fractured into this wild global optimism.
Oh, totally. I mean, the sources highlight David Hasselhoff performing in a light-up jacket at the falling Berlin Wall.
It sounds completely absurd now, but the analysis actually presents it as the ultimate symbol of a psychological shift, moving from existential dread to a belief that the old barriers were actually coming down.
Right, and that psychological shift fundamentally changed consumer behavior. When people feel optimistic, they want tools that give them control over their environment.
Okay, but let me challenge that idea of an open society for a second. If the 80s are supposed to be this pinnacle of shared physical community, didn't that decade actually invent the personal bubble?
Ah, you were talking about the Walkman.
Yeah, exactly. We think of modern smartphones as isolating, but what about the Walkman effect?
Well, yes, the Sony Walkman absolutely created headset culture when it dropped in 1979.
Yep.
It was the first time an individual could curate their own public sonic environment.
Right, you could soundtrack your bus ride.
Exactly. But the source material makes a critical distinction here between personal agency and modern social isolation. Yes, you had your own music, but you didn't have a glowing screen commanding all of your visual attention.
That is a really good point. And when you got home to actually socialize, you still had physical hurdles, like calling a friend's landline and awkwardly asking their parents if they were home.
Yeah, the technology gave you control without severing the physical tie, which maps perfectly onto the 1984 Apple Mac.
Oh, right, the introduction of the graphical user interface.
Yes, the mechanism of change wasn't just raw computing power. Instead of having to memorize abstract text commands to run a machine, you could just click a picture of a file folder. It democratized the digital world.
It took computing out of the hands of specialized scientists and just handed it to you, the individual. And that newfound agency cascaded into visual media too, right?
Time. When MTV launched in 1981, it forced an industry-wide pivot. Music was no longer just an auditory experience.
Right. Artists like Madonna and Michael Jackson had to construct these highly produced cinematic visual identities to survive.
Because consumers suddenly demanded control over how they experienced media, which perfectly explains why the VCR was such a big deal.
Oh man, the VCR, it didn't just play movies, it literally invented time shifting.
Yeah, think about the mechanics of television before the VCR. The network completely dictated your schedule. If a show aired at 8 p.m., you were on the couch at 8 p.m., or you missed it forever.
But the VCR allowed you to record a live broadcast and watch it on your own terms.
It was the absolute birth of on-demand culture.
Yet, ironically, this tool of ultimate personal convenience spawned a massive communal ritual. the neighborhood weekend video rental store.
Oh, right.
You had the power to watch a movie at home, but you still had to physically drive to the store, bump into your neighbors in the sci-fi aisle, and debate what to rent. Again, the keys to the car, but still a curfew.
Exactly. And that specific balance is why we are currently so saturated in 1980s nostalgia. The research points to the 40-year nostalgia cycle.
So what does this all mean for you listening right now? What is the 40-year cycle?
It is a psychological and demographic pattern.
Hmm.
Basically, the generation that grew up 4 decades prior finally reaches the apex of media creation. They instinctively recreate the environment of their formative years.
Which is exactly why you are seeing Stranger Things, synthwave music, and neon aesthetics everywhere right now.
Right. Our current culture is craving the safety, familiarity, and positive vibes of that specific era.
That makes so much sense. But it leaves me with a final, provocative thought for you to mull over as you navigate your own digital bubbles today.
Oh, what is that?
Well, if the 1980s are revered because they struck this perfect harmony between physical community and exciting new digital tools, what exactly will our current hyper-digital decade look like when its nostalgia cycle hits 40 years from now?
That is a fascinating question.
Yeah, I mean, will there be any shared physical culture left for us to miss?